All right, so this week was the first week of Epic. And we had a lot of fun actually putting together that transition video to kind of set up the whole thing. And we did like the original music and everything like that. And you were commenting that there was a lot of bass in it, but we were like, no, it needs more bass. We were saying that in creative meeting today. But the Epic series is centered around Elijah. So my first question is, why did you pick Elijah? There's so many like amazing biblical characters and stories within the Bible that are very epic. So what drew you to Elijah's story?
I think that it's consistent with the two major figures of the Old Testament, the law and the prophets. So I could have chosen Moses or Elijah, but one of those had to be it. But you're right, there's so many different epic stories. And, epic, what is that? It's really a long narrative, a long poem, typically the Iliad or the Odyssey. And what makes them epic is that they survived the test of time.
Right.
And these have survived the test of time. So for thousands of years, we have these stories. And the other thing that's really interesting about it to me is that they weren't written down right away. These stories were told orally for generations. And stories, as we know, have a tendency to grow.
Right.
So some of the things that happen, the fish was, this big, and then all of a sudden it's this big, and then it's this big.
Right.
Stories rarely grow shorter. As a matter of fact, in ancient literature, if you're studying critical literary styles and techniques, you'll see the longer the story, the less original it is. There's always add to, never take away.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things that you pointed out this weekend during your history lesson for the first 10, 15 minutes, you kind of had to set up this whole thing. So it was a history lesson, which I really enjoyed because a lot of that stuff I didn't know.
Right.
But you had pointed out that, there was no major miracles, at least within the biblical text, between Moses and Elijah.
Right.
And then from Elijah, the next guy up was Jesus.
Right.
So is there any sort of correlation between those biblical texts as far as did the biblical writers need to show that Elijah was this amazing man of God like Moses? Was there that motivation there?
Well, I think, yes, there was the motivation, but I think secondly, it's a different angle. Moses represents the law, the Torah. And this connection with God, which leads to giving us this law. The Elijah comes in and says, okay, we have the law, but we've lost sight of it. So we need to cycle back around to it. What happened to the law? It's still important. These principles of life are still important to live by. So I think that's the purpose of Elijah. Then you jump ahead to Jesus, who comes in and says, well, it was said to you this, but it's kind of not that he negates the law, as some people would say, but at one point he says, I didn't come to destroy this, I came to fulfill it.
Right.
So people say, well, the God of the Old Testament is not the same God of the New Testament. I'd say look more closely. And you'll find that the same theme in Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 6, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. And you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, is the same thing that Jesus quoted. So he wasn't trying to say, I've got something new to tell you.
Right.
Simply that you guys have lost your way. And let me show you what this originally intended. These commandments that I give you today, it's not about the commandments, are to be upon your hearts. And Jesus came to show this internalization of these commands is what's more important. But I think we as human beings, we have a typical our typical response as humans, let's externalize rather than internalize. It's a lot easier for me to put the law on the back of my hands or on my forehead or have a prayer shawl than it is for it to be in my heart, because you can't see it in my heart.
Exactly.
But you can see it on my hand.
Yeah. I think Troy said that a couple weeks ago. He just said, we can agree that homelessness is a problem and needs to be fixed, but until you actually go out and do something about it,
right?
It's this, you need to do something. You can't just believe something. You have to actually do this. And I think that's the amazing thing about a lot of these major biblical stories, is that you see this kind of evolution and understanding of God. There's not it's not laid out and then everybody gets it for the rest of time, that people kind of sway and they go in different directions and they're affected by the culture of their time. And then you have these prominent people like Elijah that recorrects and kind of refocuses on the important things. The last point you made this week was trusting God leads to faithful living. The prominent voice in Christianity today says kind of a little bit different. It says fearing God leads to faithful living. What's the difference there? Why does Suncoast proclaim this specific one? Why would you say it that way as opposed to what normal, fundamental, or evangelical Christian churches say?
Well, back into the time of war, when you get in the foxhole and the bombs are crashing all around you, you are promised anything to get out of the foxhole. But as soon as you get out of the foxhole, those promises are no longer valid. Fear-based promises are not promises that will last a lifetime. If I'm afraid of something, it really doesn't motivate me in the appropriate way to change. I may change my behavior, but internally I have not changed. I think one of the things that Suncoast proclaims, and I get to proclaim, is that God loves me just as I am, and that no matter whether it rains or the sun shines, or I am in perfect health or have 2 major shoulder surgeries within 3 years, I still trust God with my life. It's all about seeing a bigger picture, that it's not about the inconveniences of life, but it's I trust Him, and as I do, the response to that is I begin to live more faithfully. Because of that trust, I simply live from the inside out. It's part of my DNA, and fear I don't think is healthy. It's not good psychologically. And when you go to a psychiatrist or a therapist, one of the things they deal with are your phobias or your fears. Those are not positive attributes, but we in Christianity traditionally have used those fears to keep people in line. And I just have to throw the if I were in the NFL, I'd throw a flag, and say, I'm sorry, this is out of bounds, or this is a personal foul. This is unacceptable behavior. This is not the right motivation for anyone's life to be transformed.
I couldn't agree more, and that's perfectly said. I don't have anything else to add to that. That was amazing. So this coming up weekend, we've got Dr. Troy Doucet on the stage for the very first time. I know he's pumped, he's ready, and he's really excited about this new series. Do you have anything to add, or do you have anything that you want to add one more thing to your sermon from this weekend?
Well, this week, like you said, I laid the foundation, and we talked about the predicament. The predicament is there's no rain. And we're going to move this week from the predicament to the provision. We're going to see what's the next step, because it's this journey in Elijah's life that we see him confront a lot of different aspects of humanity. And part of it is, hey, you just got to, the king is there, he's disregarded the internal law of God, he's leading people down the wrong path, and the prophet comes in to say, hey, guy, you're going the wrong way.
Yeah.
And because of that, the consequences are going to be this, and no rain. And the irony is, there was no rain on the land for 3.5 years, but as soon as it was out this weekend, it starts
like a tropical storm outside.
Yeah, we had a 30-minute tropical rain to where people couldn't get to their cars. So, and it's not that we're cursed for that. In the testamental times, particularly in Palestine, rain is called blessing.
Yeah,
because it's a very arid country, and they need a lot of rain, and they don't get it.
Right.
We in Florida, we're dry in the winter, but wet in the summer, and this is our busy time for rain. And we just soak it up. I mean, it's part of life, and just enjoy life as it is. So it's kind of we lay the foundation. This is what's happened. The predicament is lack of rain, a drought, and then what happens because of the drought. You're going to see some of the response of God, what happens when someone really hits the dry times of their lives, and that's what we're going to talk about this weekend.
Well, I can't wait. Well, Pastor, thank you so much for being on the One More Thing podcast today.
My pleasure.
All right, thanks.